Welcome back. You've missed me. Back after almost exactly a month, which was not my plan. But it is July 4th, 2020, in the early wee morning of July 4th, 2020, as I record this. Not a normal 4th of July celebration on tap. We're on the 7,421st day of the COVID-19 catastrophe. Had a tragic death and protests and other things going on, here in New York and obviously Minneapolis and all over the country. Seeing a lot of well-meaning people do things that probably aren't smart. Seeing a society where nonconformity is becoming synonymous with heresy, and the last thing we need right now is like some kind of political orthodoxy, or everybody's got to close ranks and think one way or the other, because we need people thinking in all directions to kind of figure a way out of the current conundrum we find ourselves in. But that a lot of thinking outside the narrow window is being punished right now, so it's understandable in a way. It's like the veil of ignorance of humanity has been lifted a little bit, and now we're like, oh shit, but everybody's scrambling because they realize the old stories don't make much sense anymore. We probably should be in an area right now where the ironic thing is, because we're a little bit more uncertain, maybe because of these new channels of open information being warmed up, and also just entirely new media created and then being weaponized in a few short years, we are a little unsteady, maybe psychologically, maybe intellectually, maybe whatever. And so we reach out for the firm hold of ideology, political, religious, whatever. I think we're just, we're trying to find our balance, but we're doing it with the wrong stuff. Or I'm wrong. And I just socially constructed all that, and I just made your own reality for you and me. You're guilty too now. Who knows? Anyway, did a little bit of marketing work. I am on track to hit 1 view by the end of this year, so fingers crossed. I'm joined by my friend here, Bell's Two Hearted Ale. Interesting story about that beer. I enjoy drinking it. Anyway, and some other friends who, players to be named later. And we left off with, I just looked it up a month ago, I left off with Gordon Kane. So the next person on this list, this ought to be fun, is, I have not even started thinking about this until 2 minutes ago when I looked up my next question. And I thought, this is not the best question to kick off a new run. I'm like 88 for 88. I don't want to screw it up now. But there you go. So Stuart Kauffman is, one second here, the profession of biological sciences, physics, astronomy, he covers the whole thing, at the University of Calgary. Excellent hockey team. Statistically speaking, I'm correct. Author of Reinventing the Sacred. That's a different way to say lies worth believing. So maybe, and his last question is, I'll go back to us now. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the ability to, it's the ability for an agent, a sufficiently complex algorithm, a human, a biological creature, the ability to virtualize itself, the ability for it to be self-referential. So it's in a way, it's the ability to run simulations on reality and step back from also the ability to run. This is probably ensconced in the ability to virtualize oneself, but it's also the ability to like create like second order, third order, fourth order, fifth, nth order permutations of your, you know, of whatever your theory of the world might be. So if you're a wolf and you just, even the extent of you just, okay, it's like they just experiment on reality. So it's like, you go this way, either he lives or he dies, but probably doesn't contemplate that living or dying. And that rule is an algorithm that does not permit for the ability to self-referentially think, if I go this way, this happens. If I go that way, that happens. How can I, all of that mathematics is done subconsciously. So maybe the relationship between mathematics and consciousness is very fundamental. Maybe consciousness is the degree to which we are able to perform certain types of mathematical calculations, or like solve certain types of mathematical equations or simulate them. I'm guessing, I'm trying to say it's like when the math comes to a level, below a certain level, all of the math is built into the system. At a certain level, that math is open for tinkering, introspection. It's I want to just say it becomes, but that's the definition. It's like when When we can math something out, that's consciousness. I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it. It is our ability. It is our ability to create purpose independently from the purpose that the system was designed for. It's the ability for something to explore the landscape of purpose instead of being constrained by, the system that got you there, which is the ultimate progressive argument, right? You don't have to live to have kids and have whatever. You can do so many things. We have to open up the world for other ways of, totally get it. It's just that they're not very good right now. I love progressivism except for its current inhabitants, but the views are beautiful. It's the people. It's not even the people. Anyway. I think it has to do with the ability for an entity to virtualize itself, be self-referential, which viewed from another way is kind of the same thing as saying that certain mathematical branches or types of equations can be, it comes out of the mist. Like the math is now a tool instead of being a constraint or a given. It's like when the mathematics of a system is no longer axiomatic to that system. Dennett would say that it's an epiphenomenon. It's just kind of the mist that it's the result of battles for our attention, kind of the Microsoft Task Manager view of consciousness. It's just like all the stuff asking for our attention, whatever wins, that's what we call consciousness. I think he's wrong, but in a really good way. That might be the lie that points us towards the truth. There may be no way to, like, even if we decided that consciousness was we figured it out. It's like, oh, this galaxy or this branch of mathematics is not available to unconscious systems, and then as this branch of mathematical whatever becomes available, that is synonymous with what we call consciousness. Even if we decided that, the same way we figured out the different frequency millihertz of every color that we call a color on the spectrum, and we unweave the rainbow. Even if we decide that, I don't think it's going to make much difference in our everyday lives, because it is, that knowledge won't be as important as our ability to use drugs or different whatever to to impact it. It's like the knowledge will be a little drier, but the modification of it through recreational and other uses will be the wetness, will be the real, I'm of the opinion that when we do have a satisfying empirical formula or conceptual framework to understand consciousness, we will be quite disappointed. I just feel like that's what's going to happen. We'll be like, oh, okay. It's about linear algebra or something, it'll be just, it was the journey, not the answer. That'll be interesting probably. Anyway, probably learn much more from the journey to the idea of what consciousness is than we'll ever get when we reach the destination. Anyway, so Stuart A. Kauffman, what is consciousness? It's the ability for an agent to be self-referential. It's the ability for that agent to virtualize itself in order to lower the cost of exploration, basically, and increase the ability of exploration on all the landscapes that you would conceptualize we can explore. Ability to craft purpose apart from the system. And it's the ability to mathematically be able to have certain mathematics taken as axioms to the system, as opposed to tools, things that can be gamed, things that can be modified. Okay, so there's your answer. What is consciousness? Next, Brian Keating. Oops. I know what I'm going to do. This is going to be very exciting. Well, not that one. Well, oh, come on, you lousy. You lousy. Just going to do this. I'm going to ask this and then I'm going to get it. Oh, yikes. Okay. Brian Keating. I'll fix this in a second. Brian G. Keating, who's the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor of Physics at the University of California, San Diego, author of Losing the Nobel Prize, a story of cosmology, ambition, and the perils of science's highest honor. It's an interesting take on, they won, but who lost the Nobel Prize? Because they probably have an interesting story as well, and probably about every case, because, up until this series of videos becomes famously worldwide, and then they invent a new prize or series of prizes specifically for me, the Nobel will have a lot of intellectual, panache and gravitas, and the winners of the Nobel up to at least circa 2020, for probably another 6 months anyway, are minor scientific celebrities, and I think up until now that's been okay. It's going to change. It's going to change. Brian G. Keating's last question is there any observational evidence that could shake your faith or lack thereof. Is there any okay, all right. Is there any observational evidence could shake your faith or lack thereof? Let me see if we can't do a little bit of justice. See, is that good? I'm going to try this one more time because I don't know when to quit. No. Oh, I forgot how to do this thing in the last month. Whatever you want to say about me, I'm showing my work. Okay. Is there any observational evidence that could shake your faith or lack thereof? Well, the first thing to do, I guess, is you can approach this from a religious context. Let's just take that out of the way. Okay. I am not a religious person. I think atheism makes the most sense. I see that there can be great value in religion. You know, it certainly, at least in our past, whether that value holds, you know, whether it has the same currency from this point on or not is an open question. What are the new lies worth believing is my poetic take on that question. What would make me believe in a God or something outside of the universe that created the universe? And you know, it all depends on how you define this shit. So I think it's moderately likely that this universe could have been created by another thing, but I also think that it's pretty likely that that thing evolved, or you know, started from simplicity and built in complexity. I don't think my universe makes sense that you would start with something incredibly complex and then make things less complex. And it seems to me that a God in the metaphysical context of something that did not evolve but was just either always there or whatever seems so much more complex than anything else that I guess I would have a very hard time unwrapping the conceptual framework of complexity arising from simplicity. So, what would shake my faith? That would be difficult, because even if I saw some being that was able to do incredible things that we would just call miracles, and you know, I would simply think, well, they're just more complex than we are. They're more scientifically advanced. They've learned more about the universe. They're able to manipulate mathematics, and through that technology is much more advanced ways than we are able to. So, you know, it fits right in the framework, but I'd have a really hard time with. And if it appeared to me in a religious framework, like, you know, a figure of Jesus, you know, coming out of the clouds and riding on horses, and I have to say I would be much more likely to think that that's just what what something is now simulating, or what something is now, um, it's Hollywood, maybe from another galaxy, but it's still Hollywood, or it's I would be very, very likely to even, I hate to admit this because I like to try and think I'm open-minded, but it's very, very difficult for me to think that there could have been something ultimately complex at the very beginning, or even what that means. But the ultimately complex is the system, right? So I mean, certainly if there was a worldwide recognized event where some type of biblical thing happened, and it's happened according to a prophecy, and it was empirically verifiable somehow, and wide swaths of humans were utterly convinced of it, and I would be not being intellectually charitable or intellectually graceful if I did not allow for the possibility that could be evidence for what I am predisposed to not think in those terms. I'd have to say, you know what, I've got to reevaluate things a little bit, because and then maybe that'd start me thinking about like panpsychism, and consciousness is the ultimate thing, and there was a first consciousness. I don't know. It would be very difficult. Thinking about this question is potentially one of the better things we could do in this age, just to like, okay, I got talent. If we think about this question, it might cause us a moment to pause. And while you'd think that it would be like, okay, we're going to become less stable because we're thinking about things that would shake our faith, or make us change our mind, which should make us less stable. But maybe we would realize that because the people that we don't agree with have their reasons as well, and we're a little bit more inflexible than we ever thought we were, it might cause us to actually become a little bit more ideologically empathetic to people that maybe we don't agree with, and it may conversely actually make us a little bit more able to progress and more able to do things, because we recognize the value of doubt. There is untapped potential in the value of doubt. And this question brings that point out. So, Brian G. Keating, one of the most potentially constructive questions I've seen on this, and there's your answer. Un momento. Okay. Next up. Okay, Paul Kadrowski. Like how I slipped in just a little bit of not Russian but Ukrainian accent in there. Just a little bit, 12%. That's how good I am. Paul Kadrowski is the editor of Infectious Greed and general partner at SK Ventures. And Paul Kadrowski's last question is, why don't naked mole rats age or get cancer? Okay. So I have heard there are many things about naked mole rats, other than they're not shy about their but I am not as up to speed in the literature around naked mole rats as I could be. So the question, why don't they get cancer, age or get cancer? I'm going to say that's somewhat hyperbolous, not hyperbolous, but a little hyperbole, a little hyperpoly. I'm going to assume that they age very slowly, perhaps telomeric. Maybe they have a different timer on their telomeric, stuff like that, but it could be at the level of the telomeres, because that's so it's so far behind. Like, I think it would be hard for a system acting just on kind of like how telomeric length and that, that's kind of built in too far ahead from the species level to be. I'm getting ahead of myself, which is what I'd do. Or get cancer. That's probably the same question. Is that the same question? Aging and getting cancer are two flip sides of the same senescence and carcinogenity. I'm going to say that these are, they do age at some point, and they do have the potential to get cancer and do get cancer at some point, because otherwise we're just like, I think we're screwing around with the second law of thermodynamics if we say they don't ever age or ever get cancer. So why is it greatly reduced, aging and cancer greatly reduced in naked mole rats? Well, hey, they're naked. They don't have clothing around them. We all know clothing causes cancer. What would make any agent more likely to no longer be able to regulate its level of entropy? That's the general principle. How would that general principle manifest itself in the biology of DNA and carbon and mammals? Couldn't Couldn't you view life at least at one level as like the level at which it's able to regulate its entropy? Or words very similar to that, but which are actually make sense and are true? Another way to look at it is what is the do naked mole rats continue to have kids for the entire time that they age or get cancer? Are they continuously reproductive, or do they still, after a reproductive age, still not get sick, or there's not a thing like this? Because you can easily see reasons why after a particular individual animal's reproductive age has been eclipsed, or at least they're in the middle of it or whatever, reasons why that individual would die would go up. That's elementary. But if they stayed having children and just had a much longer procreative period, then that would turn the question on its head. So that's the answer I would want to know. That would guide my thinking about, because from one end, the other way to answer a question, it would be like, why do naked mole rats get to fuck for so long productively? And it may be more fruitful to approach the answer from that perspective. But if they stop reproducing for the most part at age 3 and they live to 23, then the question could be conceived: what value do naked mole rats provide to other individuals in their group, the group itself? Then you have to look at reproductive payoffs and value of post-reproductive age mole rats. Maybe they are providing the ability for the rest of for their reproductive siblings, the colony, the whatever, to navigate a landscape of fitness that is still of great value, even though they're not actually reproducing. They are, freeing them up from reproduction allows them to be of greater beneficial to the group or to whatever, and so that's why they're still around. I don't know which way to approach this question from, because I don't know if they stay having kids their whole life or if they stop but still stay healthy relative to other creatures. But if you knew that, you'd approach the question from one perspective to the other. They're probably not as exposed to radiation as heavily as we are, just from a very pragmatic. Don't they live pretty much underground their whole lives, or almost their whole lives? So they're not getting radiational bombardment from the sun. Have we just thought about that? Maybe creatures that don't see the sun as much have kind of homeostasis themselves around a different level of aging and cancer, because they're not getting pinged all the time by this thing that can screw them up. So if you've got the sun, which hits the radiation, which can cause defects, which can cause errors in the DNA, errors in the code. If you have that happening all the time, that would make more sense that you'd want to cut it off sooner, because sooner or later it's just going to get you. It's like a timer. It's just going to get you because of all the, if that is a major source of copy errors in a system is the sunlight, then it would make sense for creatures that experience higher levels of sunlight to have different homeostasis levels around how long they would live, potentially, and how long they would, because if you only get 1/3 of those potential copy errors hitting you, or 1/10th or 1/50th or 1,000th, it may just make more sense, because you're not getting pinged all the time with something that at the end of the day is just going to get you. So that's your answer, maybe. Sir Paul Kadrowski. Interesting last question, and you seem to be involved with capitalism. So if I answered your question, perhaps you could introduce me to a little capitalism? I think the point about the radiation is an interesting point. And also I want to know more about like what characterized their lives in general. All right. Interesting question. Next, we have Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly is senior maverick. That's interesting. At Wired, author of What Technology Wants and the Inevitable. Senior maverick at Wired. You know, you gotta love. We need nonconformity. We need for the space to be, for nonconformists to be able to raise up their heads without being caught in the crossfire. Apologies. Kevin Kelly is senior maverick at Wired and author of What Technology Wants. That's a you got to flip it around. And the Inevitable. It's not that I have beliefs, it's that beliefs have me. Ideologies make good lenses, but lousy mirrors. Kevin Kelly, senior maverick at Wired, author of What Technology Wants and the Inevitable. Kevin Kelly's last question is, how can the process of science be improved? I freaking rumba. I think one way the process can be improved is, and it has been doing this, but by being aware of the fact that scientific discovery can lead to a kind of narrative orthodoxy, even though you wouldn't expect that out of science. It's not there to inform orthodoxy, but it can create a kind of narrative orthodoxy which blinds us to other aspects of discovery, or which shape the way we have of looking at the world, which shapes a lot of other things. And so science has to be aware of the narrative implications of its discoveries. So I'm trying to rescue the baby of postmodern thought out of the bathwater of its current manifestations, or at least a fair amount of them, as I have seen. It's got to be the salt, not the steak, but it should be part of the ideological meal. So I guess science needs to become aware of its ability to virtualize itself and understand what that virtual representation of itself, what that relationship is to humanity, is carving out humanity and, to a certain extent, our shared reality, and to be cognizant of that, and to be skeptical of big narratives, even if they're big scientific narratives, all while still praying to the God of objectivity, while realizing it's likely a dead God. So science somehow needs to become self-aware, which allow it to be more self-referential, which allow it to be more self-critical, which will allow it to be more understand and conceptualize its own second, third, fourth order level, whatever, effects. Science's tools and goals and methods aim to be objective, but science's impact upon reality is not objective. Realizing what I just said will help. So maybe at a more pragmatic level, everybody's got to take a couple courses in like epistemology. Even, molecular biologists need to take a few courses in epistemology. They can even read Foucault, but not too much. Process. Process involves, to me, like it's recipe. It's like you take the cherries out, you put them on the plate, you cut little hearts in them, then you flip them over, you fill them with filling, an intellectual assembly line almost, or an intellectual recipe. What needs to be added to that? What can we add to the recipe of scientific discovery to improve the results Thinking about it that way might help. Perhaps thinking of discovery of results as a way of navigating idea space as like a landscape of discovery. Instead of kind of a war won or lost, I guess I'm thinking more of it like a way to explore rather than a way to define. Maybe we it's going back to just recent thoughts I've had, but maybe if we become too, we might become too limited when we bound our identity up in with our discovery, with our we use our victories and losses and whatever to define us, when we should be using them as tools to look at the universe. We let our identity become too wrapped up in a lot of these issues, and I think that's actually causing us to ossify our ideologies and our thoughts, and constrain us from real exploration of the cognitive and whatever landscape. It's like we're too bound up in ourselves, and then we're like, I can't go there. It doesn't have air conditioning, and we have to just have to be more comfortable in just being able to explore, which means we need to lower the cost for going in the wrong way. Scientists who didn't find useful answers have to be thought of as wrong, not heretics. And too often I think they're viewed as heretics. The hell do I know? So it's A over B Zelta pi muon over time expressed in 4 dimensions. Kevin Kelly, that is your answer. I'm going to take a brief timeout and get us another beer, because I know you're thirsty. I'm thirsty. We're all thirsty. And then continue here, because we are now, 91 for 91? My God, no bells suck. Shall return. We're back. Apologize for the delay. I had to beat up some ideologies in the back corner there. That last one was from Kevin Kelly. The next question is from Marcel Kinsborn. Marcel Kinsborn. What a distinctive name. A neurologist and cognitive neuroscientist. This will be an easy one, I can tell. At the New School. It's not far from here. And no, it probably is. That's a different new school. Co-author of Children's Learning and Attention Problems. I'm well affiliated with that. One more time. Neurologist and cognitive neuroscience at the New School and co-author of Children's Learning and Attention Problems. And Marcel Kinsborn's last question is, are dreams brief glimpses of the narrative of a subconscious alternative reality? I'm going to see if this... Oh, it fits perfectly. Our dreams, brief glimpses of the narrative of a subconscious alternative reality. Let's take this apart. Let's take it apart. Let's deconstruct so we can reconstruct. Let's start from the other way. Subconscious alternative reality. I feel like he's saying our dreams our dreams brief looking at the wave functioning, at the wave function working its probability out as it is it seeing Schrodinger's cat in all of its various manifestations. I may be taking where he's going with this wrong, which is considering the fact that I'm just seeing the sentence right now, it's likely I am. But if I'm going to go with that direction, because that's an interesting thought for me, is this kind of like the dreams let us see the wave and not just the particle? No. Next. I don't think so. Poisonally? I think dreams are yes. Next question. Dreams are a lot of things. They're, they can be file recovery and defragmentation. They can be the song we sang when we forgot the lyrics. I don't think I personally don't think that a part of that's a manifestation of some type of multiverse thing or alternate reality. I think it has more to do with maybe like the ghosts of self-reflection and of dreams can be a lot of things. You got a way that they could be a way of illuminating something that's so deep that we can't get to it consciously. That's like, it's almost like between the almost like something between the software and the hardware. That's like trying to percolate something up. Like the software needs to tell the hardware needs to tell the software something, but it doesn't have a language for that. It doesn't have its lexicon. So I think dreams are grounded much more in more pragmatic, computational explanations, in narrative, but I mean, if you define alternate reality in a broader context, alternate reality could just be like what I was going to do for lunch instead of what I thought of 2 minutes ago. What the hell is an alternative reality? It's a much bigger concept in there than that's like not a one-dimensional word. Are dreams actually subconscious? I mean, I know I'm skipping some words in there, but I think the presupposition is that dreams are subconscious. Goes back to the definition of consciousness, doesn't it? Of course, the easy answer is yes, because we don't actually control we don't control our dreams as we would typically say dreams are, but yet we don't control our vision, but we certainly say that vision is part of consciousness. It's all about control. Freedom is an illusion. I think part of that answer could absolutely be right, and I think subconscious and alternative reality are doing so much work there. They need to be pinned down before you can tackle that question in any type of concrete way. However, given the fact that this is more like jazz than it is math. It's jazz on ideas. And this is a jazzy idea. I like the idea of narrative because that seems to be at the sub-basement level 4 of our cognitive construction of reality, as the narrative seems so fundamental to how we construct. It's like the addition and subtraction of epistemology. I'm going to use that word 4 more times tonight. Bird. I think they might be, but I think you really got to pin down what you mean by subconscious and what you mean by alternative reality. I think much of dreams, more than is sexy to think about, is probably just computational housekeeping. There's certainly parts of it that are maybe the hardware talking to the software without a real language, or that is the language of the hardware talking to the software. So that is your answer, Sir Marcel Kinsborn, with a distinctive name and an interesting question. Thank you for that. Next we have does that fit? Well, we've got Gary Klein, who's a senior scientist at Macrocognition LLC, author of Seeing What Others Don't, The Remarkable Ways We Gain Insights. Gary's last question is, how can we build machines that make us smarter? Boom. How can we build machines that make us smarter? It's not in there, but trust me, that's the word. Define machines, define us, and define smarter. That's a bit of an evasion. Ouch. I don't like where my thought is going. Well, one way would be, as we know the value of competition, we can see that in markets, how it plays itself out, how competition within and between societies and stuff like that can produce new heights. So the obvious answer, the scary obvious answer, would be to set up competition between machines and man. It's also how we end ourselves, but yeah, I mean, that's one way that maybe people aren't looking at it, or people are looking at it from only the potential negative aspect. Whereas we might find a way to tame the new gods. How can we build machines that make us smarter? Well, another way is machines will be able to explore landscapes much more quickly in some ways, and much more unfettered by some of the traditional conceptual traps and things that slow us down. So if we can make machines that explore landscapes better, we can be like the remote monitor on the submarine that can go deeper underwater and then can withstand the pressure of that atmosphere, that environment. And we could just be up on the deck like, oh yeah, and then we do that and stuff like that. So we use machines to probe the ideascape, and we keep ourselves somewhat detached, and then pluck from the depths wisdom where it can't be found. That answer completely evades how are we defining wisdom and how are we deciding that something is wise just by looking at it, at something the machine has seen. And I'm happy with avoiding those questions. Another way is just to think about what is, we'll go back to definitions, but what is smarter? What are we calling smarter? Maybe our conception of smart is limited, is flawed, is skewed, is anthropomorphic. Maybe our perception of what smart is has always been so anthropomorphic that when we start to build machines that can develop intelligence that isn't based on our anthropomorphic sense of intelligence, we will start to get smarter. Maybe the entire model of looking at machine learning in the context of representations and models of neurons and synapses and that thing is constraining, and we need to build AI systems that are able to creating the fundamental features of how to create systems of knowledge that are not based on how we think it has to be because we're carbon-based systems with neurons and synapses. How else could self-complexity look at itself? We can set up competitions where you have machine versus human plus machine, and figure out the ways that human plus machine can beat machine. What is the fundamental unit that defines the terrain of a landscape of intelligence? We build machines that help us understand the plumbing of epistemology. I use that word again. Whee! That help us to evaluate because if we can build machines that don't have the same quote-unquote purpose, they may not be bound up or polarized around the same conceptual traps that we are bound up in by nature of us being, mostly carbon and So Gary Klein, senior scientist at Macrocognition LLC, and again involved with capitalism. If you'd like to throw a little capitalism my way. How can we build machines that make us smarter? One word: plastics. Okay, next question. 93 for 93 here. Next question is John Kleinberg. Let's see if you can see this or not. No, you cannot. There we go. John Kleinberg is a Tisch University professor of computer science at Cornell University. John Kleinberg's last question is, can we create technologies that help equitably reduce the amount of conflict in the world? Can we create technologies that help equitably reduce the amount of conflict in the world? Now let me see if you guys can see this. Yes, you can. Okay. There is so much buried underneath that word equitably. Absolutely, we can build technologies to reduce the amount of conflict in the world. We have, even if we don't even call them technologies yet. Maybe in 100 years, if we're still around, we'll realize they were technologies. But we have reduced the amount of conflict in the world by orders of magnitude over the past several millennia, by like several orders of magnitude. And if you conceptualize conflict as something no longer being extant in a way, you'd have to conceptualize conflict on a broader level. But if you do that on a broader level, we've probably reduced the amount of conflict by 6, 7 orders of magnitude. If you go back to the Cambrian or pre-Cambrian to now. Don't hold me on the numbers or the words or the relationships. Can we create technologies that help equitably reduce the amount of conflict in the world? Well, equitably, Jesus, Maud. How do you even define equitably? That is such a subjective term that is doing so much, Take the word out, the question answers itself. Put that word in, that question becomes your view of it's like you looking at the horoscope. It's not that bad, but what is equitably? On what parameters do you use to define equitably? And what are the ideological underpinnings on which And what is the what are your axioms? What are your faith statements that you're using to construct your mental representation of equitable upon these maybe castles made of sand? And even deciding that they're castles made of sand is subjective. There's so much in the equitably portion of that sentence. Equitably could be reducing the amount of conflict so that it benefits the average agent in a system the most in a given time frame. Do you count this as an infinite game, or do you count this as a finite game? That changes everything. Do you count it? Do you define this on like utilitarian terms, or do you just say, whatever technologies that reduce the amount of conflict that allows us to travel the farthest to see the world in ways that will lead us to better, greener pastures, even if it's harder to get there. I mean, there's so many different ways that there's so much ideology bound up in equitably. There's also a fair amount of ideology bound up in conflict, but I think equitably is even worse than conflict. Like, conflict is grayscale, equitably is, Adobe RGB. The degrees of freedom in which we could define conflict are less than the degrees of freedom in which we could define equitably. One way to define equitably could be as the adverse of the measure of guilt in a society. It's hard to define equitably, is all I'm saying. Excuse me. I don't know why. For some reason the camera stops recording. For some reason. Oops. Damn Sony's. That's a good camera. Freaking thing records in ISO 5000 and can't even hardly tell. I think we are bound to create technologies that reduce the amount of conflict in the world. But your view of whether they were equitable or not is very hard to tease away from what your system of thought is upon the world. So it's very hard to your parameters on which to measure equitably are so let's get a technology that can define equitably. It's going to be entirely dependent upon the presuppositions that you put in the model. It's where frickin'. It's my half curse. It's frickin'. It's where the incompleteness theorem collides head on with the progressive mindset, with the progressive agenda. And I love the idea of a progressive agenda, and I love the idea of progress, and I love the idea of increased fairness, increased equitably. But you are I think very often progressivism puts the cart of equitably whatever in front of the horse of ideology. So, John Kleinberg, the answer to your question, can we create technologies that help equitably reduce the amount of conflict in the world, is yes, but you have to subtract Adobe RGB minus grayscale divided by ideology, and that is a nonlinear equation, is the answer to that. That's the problem. Okay. Next one is from Brian. See if you can see this. Brian Knutson. Quick story there. My brother-in-law. We're all Dutch in ethnicity. A lot of strange sounding names in Dutch. Anyway, my brother-in-law went to school with a guy. His name was Jack. First name was Jack. Last name was spelled similar to this, but it was Knaupph. Yeah, so his name was Jack Knaupph. Jack Knaupph was a very good woodworker, very skilled, made clocks out of tree, like the stumps and the bases of trees. Incredibly good woodworker. It's very, very very pleased with Jack Knaupph. Actually, a little bit inspired by Jack Knaupph. Anyway, Brian Knutson is the professor of psychology and neuroscience at Stanford University. Brian Knutson, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Maybe it's just Knutson. Or maybe it's K. Knutson. Dear apologies, Brian Knudsen, who is the professor of psychology and neuroscience at Stanford University. Brian's last question is, how can we achieve closed loop neural control of human hedonics? Oh, Christ, am I going to have to pretend I know what words mean? Change that. Oh! How can we achieve closed-loop neural control of human hedonics? I'm going to have to make some assumptions about definitions of things, starting with hedonics. Hedonics, I think hedonism. Hedonism, I think, is like the pursuit of pleasure. So what I'm thinking, and this could lead me directly on the wrong path, but maybe it might be interesting, who knows, is that he's wondering how we can get rodeo control over the dopamine hit when we get a like, or we get how do we get control of that system? How do we get control of our dopamine system? How do we stop it from becoming like runaway feedback, so that we can step in the middle of that loop and close the loop and say, wait a second, this sugar high is going in the wrong direction. We don't want to achieve total closed-loop neural control. Because total control over the loop is its own authoritarian control. We have to have a more proper conceptualization of the discipline of the loop. We have to be able to shut it down without thinking that the control of it is something that we should always be. We shouldn't always be the traffic cop or the stoplight or whatever there. We should have conceptual systems in place, and even at a much lower level, systems in place. Grand things can be built. New landscapes can be explored, and possibly only explored via some kind of crazy open-looped neural feedback mechanisms that can get concepts springboarding from area to area, which would have been shut down if we had more of a authoritarian if the for statement was always present in an if then loop, it may be potentially less destructive, but also would shut down avenues of inquiry or avenues of exploration, we'll put it that way, that having systems that don't have a for statement in all of their if and then loops would not be able to experience. And I am at the edge of my ability to communicate anything. And all this depends upon my definition of hedonics as larger and larger organic manifestations of the kind of the dopamigenic system, that hit you get when whatever, manifested in the NutraSuite of, an Instagram like, or, it should be manifested in smiles and laughter, in holding somebody, in helping someone, in shared silence. Yeah. But his question is not should we, but how can we? Well, you would have to virtualize you'd have to be able to virtualize the virtualization that the brain is doing via interactions on a almost synaptical level, which are so you'd have to be able to look at the landscape of what's going on in the brain, and in terms of hormonal and other indicators of systems. And then you'd have to have basically that would have to be an interface. You'd have to have another sense or another interface into your own brain, which is kind of like looking at itself and saying, "Oh, you're getting a lot of pleasure from frickin' Fortnite or whatever the fuck. The dopamine receptors are hitting. Is this, but it's also cutting off blah 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 blah. So we're gonna have to view the pleasure, reward, pain interface or conceptualization of this thing as a model, as an input into its own system. So we become self-referential on top of self-referential, and the ghost interrogates the machine. So, Brian Knutson, your question of how can we achieve closed-loop neural control of human hedonics is, be careful what you wish for. And you shut off the doors of opportunity. But we just need a new sense, which could be construed as a conceptual interface that uses as its input the functioning of our nervous synaptive hormonal chemical system, the interface between the electrical and chemical system of our reward center. Thank you for that question. Okay, next. Bart Costco, who if his name was spelled differently would be probably much richer than he is. Bart Costco is an information scientist and professor of electrical engineering and law. It's interesting to get these cross-functional specialization. It's just like electrical engineering and then law. So it's almost by definition, he kind of has to be a systems thinker, thinking in terms of like, step back and look at how this thing moves, but it's a system of idea, how this system of idea moves and maintains itself. And information scientist and professor of electrical engineering and law, University of Southern California, author of Noise and Fuzzy Thinking, or could just be Noise, Fuzzy Thinking. I think that's two different books, I think. But what's the difference between Noise and Fuzzy Thinking? That one's for the historians. Oh, I didn't even get to the question. Excuse me, Bart Costco. Bart Costco's last question is, what is the bumpiest and highest dimensional cost surface that our best computers will be able to search and still find the deepest cost well? Christ. Sounds like he's talking about something related to like gradient descent and some of these things that I have been studying a little bit in AI and stuff, which I don't really understand, which might make me the perfect person to obfuscate on this question. I'm going to think in terms of maybe landscapes, which probably isn't conceptually that different from what is the bumpiest and highest dimension, while highest dimensional, the combination of bumpiest and highest dimensional is that seems like at once the most simple and most complex thing that there is. What is the bumpiest and highest dimensional cost surface that our best computers will be able to search and still find the deepest cost well? So what is the how will we be able to look for heaven while avoiding hell? This is where I become limited because, well, I become limited in many ways, but I have a difficulty conceptualizing an idea if I can't do it visually, even if it's internally visually. So I'm thinking of like a landscape of cost, thinking about a highest, like a three-dimensional landscape, and I'm thinking about the highest like a highest mountain, and then a little hoodoo on top of that mountain. But then you have to start going in more and more dimensions, which makes you think about degrees of freedom, which I have a hard time imagining degrees of freedom if they come in batches of like more than 3, because I think visually. I'm tempted to say that the very way that we have of exploring that landscape and the dimensions on which we're able to explore will by definition define the bumpiest and the deepest well, because they'll be built into the system of search. I'm trying to think of okay, this very tall thing on top of this mountain, and it's like in a 3-dimensional kind of like graph, but then you start adding dimensions in, but still maintaining its ultimate heightness, even with more dimensions added in. And I kind of feel like every time you add a dimension in, you're going to add in the well, the deepest cost, as axiomatic almost. It's like once you add in the dimension, aren't you adding in highest cost and deepest well axiomatically? If you're not, what the hell is your dimension? So we also run into like diminishing returns on a very, very large level of adding dimensions, where it becomes almost like perturbation theory, where you add in, it's like, oh, you don't know what the orbit of the moon should be, so you consider the relationship of the moon to the Earth, and you're like, okay, that's one level, and that is going to explain most of the motion of the moon. But then the moon also revolves. Oh, you do it the other way, actually. So I want to explain the motion of the moon. So you explain the motion of the sun, which is the biggest part of the motion of the moon, and you get, on whatever thing you measure, you get 94% or whatever of what you're looking to measure. Add in the properties of the Earth, you get another 3%. So now you're up to like 99.4%. But then you add in Jupiter, that gives you another 1/18%. Start adding in everything else, you get into perturbation theory where you just get diminishing returns trying to explain something. So maybe our experience of dimensionality is a type of diminishing returns, which is contingent upon Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. So is this all dependent on the number of degrees of freedoms that we'll be able to build into our computers? Will be dependent on our expanded notion of what a degree of freedom actually is. And we weren't thinking of degree of freedom in we're thinking of it in terms of a species and not a concept. Happy 4th of July, everyone. So the answer to your question is 17. Okay, next. Next we have Stephen M. Kauffman, founding dean. Well, he should have changed his name then, because should have been Dean M. Kauffman. Wait a second. Stephen M. Kauffman is the founding dean at the Minerva Schools at the Kekistan. Is that anyway? Stephen M. Kauffman is the founding dean at Minerva Schools at the Keck Graduate Institute, and his last question is: can brain implants make us better human beings? Holy shit, it fits. Did we lose something? Stephen M. Kauffman, can brain implants make us better human beings? What does better mean? What does human being mean? What does can mean? better and human beings, there's so much bound up in those last three words there. What the fuck does better mean? What does human beings mean? What's the taxonomy of human beings versus whatever the heck else? Does human beings, is that defined by anything from 200,000 years ago to infinity? Or to whatever is still incorporated into this corporeal self, to a heart and lungs and whatever? Is whatever going on here, aided by here, definitionally human being? If that's the case, then I would say yes, probably. You still have to talk about better, but yes. There's so much in the definitions here. Better has to be defined outside of kind of like procreational success, which is like what we have post hoc defined it as in many ways up till now. What is better? Is better more equitably distributed excitations of the dopamine system? Is it more frequently visited cathedrals of thought? Is it us making us more comfortable in our shells? Is it us realizing that we are not our shells? Is that allowing us to escape our ideologies in a way? Ideologies as lenses, not as mirrors. Will it allow us to more comprehensively construct identity? What's better? Empathy is marvelous and phenomenal and can't be just a univariate good. Empathy is a qualified good. Like really empathy towards Hitler? Probably not a good idea. An never-ending yielding towards authority or towards, every virtue taken to an extreme becomes a vice. How do you find the better mix? And can the incorporization and the incorporation and the admixing of the other into the notion of the self make us better human beings? Maybe. Can breast implants make us better human beings? Maybe. Um, if brain implants helped us to uncouple ideology from identity, that could potentially help us to be better human beings. That might actually be stateable. So, Stephen M. Coughlin, your last question was, can brain implants make us better human beings? And I would say, to the extent that brain implants can help us uncouple ideology from identity, to that extent, then yes, implants can make us better human beings. And thank you for the question. 96 for 96. Next, we've got Jordan W. Krakauer. I'm going to go back to this and then go back. I'm sorry, not Jordan, John. John W. Krakauer. A tremendous amount of vowels in relation to consonants in his last name. John W. Krakauer is a neurologist and neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Is that in Baltimore, D.C., or New York? I don't know anything. John W. Krakauer's last question is our continued coexistence with the other big mammals essential to furthering our understanding of human cognition? John W. Krakauer, I'm going to now center your question if I can. Yes. Is our continued coexistence with the other big mammals essential to furthering our understanding of human cognition? This is going... I'm going to have to phone a friend on this one. Excuse me for a moment. Okay. Is our continued coexistence with the other big mammals essential to furthering our Well, it's good. We sure as hell don't want to push them into non-existence, and we don't want to destroy ecosystems either, because studying how they have conformed, modified, dominated, whatever, their own ecosystem might help us to conceptualize our own ecosystem. So just having them in zoos or some kind of similar thing to that isn't good enough either. We need to not destroy the ecosystem. I mean, coexistence, that's a big word, because we've honestly dominated the other big mammals in every way, but we've created technologies to differentiate our ecosystem from their ecosystem in ways that have been incredibly powerful. Anyway. I think yes, but I think I mean, it almost seems too provincial to anthropomorphic, but on a DNA level, DNA promorphic, whatever, to assume that understanding big mammal cognitive nervous system, whatever, architecture, understanding, function, whatever, can help us understand human cognition, can be a kind of archaeology, but I want to say that our understanding of human cognition is, if we're doing it well, is going to proceed outside of the limited bounds, or outside of the off the rails, so to speak, of what we can learn from. So what we can learn from octopi or dolphin or whatever. So although maybe we should be able to expand our understanding of human cognition, because human cognition should be able to expand via artificial intelligence, via questioning conceptual frameworks as a rule, via all this kind of stuff. So it's like our understanding of mammals gets us here, but then we can go in 1,000 different directions. So in a way, yes. In a way, we shouldn't limit ourselves. We shouldn't. As a conceptual framework, it's kind of like we shouldn't view evolution and the chance of biological life as being constrained by being carbon orientated, or carbon being the substructure of it, or being DNA orientated. We also shouldn't view cognition as being somewhat constrained by the horizons of other mammalian abilities of cognition. So in a way, the degree to which understanding of other mammalian cognitive precursors or whatever helps us understand our own is somewhat related to the ability that we haven't advanced our own in ways that are not constrained, presuppositioned by DNA and carbon and the frameworks that build the cathedrals of thought that we need to become agnostic towards. Those words don't even make any sense. See if I got one more in me. I'm not even through the case. We've got Krause. Let me put this down, see if it... Oh. Well, Krause is a software pioneer, philosopher, author of a real-time literature explorer. Krause's last question is, what will happen to religion on Earth when the first alien life form is found? Well, obviously, the first alien life form is going to ask us if we've been baptized. in the blood. Well, it's going to depend upon the situation on Earth when that happens. Because we may have invented our own aliens in terms of artificial intelligent life that is as alien to biological life, carbon-based life, whatever, that we've become comfortable and familiar with the idea that we've been too anthropomorphic in the creation and worship of our own gods. Some of the religions because it says religion on earth, is that like one? It's like saying what will happen to the sales of ice cream when people lose their ability to sense saltiness? It's like, well, probably flavors that in which saltiness is a major component will be won't sell. But religion is like flavor profile. Or is it a more unipolar, univariate thing of just like is like a as like the lie that's bound up inside the compass. That doesn't ever give us true north, because true north is always somewhat defined by a paradigm. Christ, I'm so far past the edges of my ability to think of anything or to conceptually communicate that thought. It doesn't mean that every word that I have stated thus far is complete, beautiful, poetic, as well as being literally true, worthy of various prizes, much above the level of the Nobel, and potentially fraying of the constructions that we have put on civilization to this date, and is literally worthy of choirs of the most talented, wonderful, voices in all of humanity to be singing the praises of each and every word of what I've said this entire video, as well as everyone I've ever done. The Nobel Prize was a clearing of the throat compared to the understanding that the modern world is going to reap upon this video, as well as its companions in the history of thought. there will be certain characteristics of religions, because they're not one thing. There will still be many out there that will allow them to incorporate this sudden new concept into its liturgy, into its conceptual framework, into its orthodoxy, into its dogma. What are the types of religions that would be more likely to be able to incorporate pantheisms, may be more likely to survive E.T. coming home than monotheisms? Because if you're like a monotheist and E.T. comes to visit, now you've got to assume that E.T. is the only E.T. And does that make really sense? Because before we figured out as a prerequisite that human life is like the only, smart life, and then we get E.T. and now I've got to figure out E.T. is like. So I would think that religions that incorporate a congress of gods would be more likely to incorporate E.T. than monotheisms. We are very likely to revisit the identities of self and the other. I think I've reached the edge of my ability to think. In words that aren't just conceptual splashes. I think I've gone into conceptual screensaver mode, so I'm going to say what will happen to religion on Earth when the first alien life form is found is monotheism is going to have a lot of problems. And its death will probably be a messy one. And thank you for the question, Krause. And I am going to leave now because I've surpassed my ability to make any kind of structured cognitive thought. My brain tired. Yeah. But as I still understand it, I am undefeated. I'm like 97 for 97, something like that. I have gone through the case so far completely, perfectly, accurately. Haven't even. Sometimes I miss dotting an I or crossing a T, but that has not happened tonight. Everything perfect. Anyway, we'll start off again at some point. In the meantime, it was good for you to see me. Kia Sorrento. Cheers.